when these classic psychedelics, when they bind to these population of information generating cells, these neurons in certain layers of the cortex, they stimulate, they activate these neurons, and they cause them to fire more easily and more frequently, and they cause information to start to spread between these neurons, between these cortical columns, these areas of the cortex. So the model that your brain has honed and fine-tuned with its connectivity over evolutionary epochs, over your development and experience, that model starts to be disrupted. It starts to be loosened. It's like you're disrupting all these very carefully and finely tuned patterns of connections that maintain the structure of the model and cause it to break down, right? So there we can see straight away what kind of happens with a low dose of a psychedelic. The world starts to change. It starts to seem more fluid and dynamic. The identity of objects seems to kind of change. You might see walls breathing. Everything seems a bit more labile and fluid and unpredictable. And it seems unpredictable because it is, right? The model is no longer as rigid and well-defined. And so the brain starts to fail in making these predictions. It can no longer make good predictions about the sensory information. Now, this has an important consequence because the only information that actually makes it up into your cortex, as we discussed earlier, is actually these error signals, right? When the brain makes a mistake, it fails to, its predictions are not fulfilled, then that information flows up. That's the sensory information, is in the form of error signals. So when the model starts failing, the world starts becoming more fluid, these error signals start to increase dramatically, right? So in a way, that's all I'm saying here is what, in a kind of much more modern neuroscientific parlance, is exactly what people like Huxley were saying 50 years ago, whatever, that the brain is has a filter, a reducing valve, right? Yeah. Right? Yeah. And that LSD or mescaline removes that filter. So, that was a great idea and it's kind of true, but how does that work? Now we kind of start to understand what the filter is. The filter is about predicting and basically extinguishing all sensory information that your brain can predict, because it doesn't need to know about it. And then when it fails, it's those errors that are making it through. So only a trickle of these error signals normally, because the model is working well. When the model breaks down, you get an influx of error signals. That's equivalent to basically destroying the filter. So the world becomes more dynamic, it becomes more fluid, but also becomes very sensitive to sensory information. So everything, the identity of objects starts shifting before the eyes, because your brain, of course, uses these error signals to update its model. If there's increase in error signals, the brain says this hypothesis about what this sensory information means must be wrong. And that's happening more and more when you're in the psychedelic state. And so this is why you get particularly with higher doses of psychedelics.
Now we're specifically still talking about classical psychedelics. Yes,
yeah, absolutely.
Continue.
Yeah. Yeah. So as these error signals start increasing, your brain is constantly updating its model to try and stop these error signals. It's trying to find a hypothesis that explains the sensory information, but it can't, right? So this is why you can literally see objects that will actually change their identity in front of your eyes and then change back again.